So, this session, I'm just going to mention where this came from because we worked with Charlie and Gareth and Heather on behalf of the Champions of Accessibility Network and talked about the sorts of subjects that we might want to include today that will be relevant for CAN members. This one probably came top by about 700%. Yeah. We must do something about burnout. And we weren't, to be honest, you ran a session about it last week or the week before, didn't you? Yeah. So there's been a couple of things happening that's brought us to the point today. And I wasn't quite sure how we were going to handle it. So you're going to see how we're going to handle it. But I think it's really interesting that we haven't done this sort of thing at TechShare Pro before as well. So that sort of reflects what people were asking for from amongst the champions of accessibility. But I suspect we all feel that sense of connection with a topic like this. So as a starting point, what we did is so when I say we, AbilityNet, I connected him with a coach, a life coach, and we're going to show you a brief introduction. Because I thought what we would do is start with some sort of level playing field a little bit. Is what is burnout? What do we mean by burnout? So we're going to have a short video and a little bit of an intro to the topic, and then I can't quite believe I'm saying this. I'm leaving you in Gareth's culpable hands. So, culpable hands, never anything less than. Who's going to run the session? We want it to be as interactive as possible, and I know there's going to be some stuff we're doing to draw you in as well to this session. So I just wanted to introduce it just a slightly different to other stuff you've been seeing during the day, and also really to encourage you to think about what the topic is and maybe talk about it afterwards as well and bring it to the surface for all of us. So I'm very grateful that you did suggest it, and I'm very grateful that we're doing this way. But please do join in with it as much as you can outside this session. This is a really important topic for all of us. So if we could play the VT, please.
My name's Simon Tomkins. I'm a life coach and a business owner. I run a life coaching company. Say life coaching. It's life, career, leadership, all blended into one. But we really specialize in helping people live healthy, balanced, and fulfilling lives, which means overcoming things like overwork and burnout, stress. We coach people all around the UK and abroad in other countries. And the reason we can do that, to say, is because so much of creating change is about mindset, and mindset applies to everyone and all parts of your life. So we don't need, as coaches, industry-specific knowledge to help you create very important and rapid change in whatever you're going through. You either really oversimplify burnout to define it, or you overcomplicate it. In essence, it's a sort of state of physical, mental, or emotional exhaustion, right? But it exists on a large spectrum. There are early stages of burnout, and then there's people who get to severe burnout, and they look very different. One of the ironic things about burnout is the more involved you are in your stress and your work and your responsibilities, the less likely you are to notice. But it's so important that you do notice. I get dozens of inquiries every week through my website. People saying, I think I'm burnt out, or I need to talk to a coach to get more balance in my life. The early signs are when you're maybe avoiding work, you're not looking forward to work or feeling motivated anymore. You can't switch off in the evening, you can't get to sleep. These types of things tend to happen early on, and they're all things you should notice. Because, of course, like anything, it's easier to prevent than repair. When people are really burning out, it's when they have got physical pain and discomfort. They've got brain fog. They can't think clearly. They've got insomnia. They've sometimes got stomach problems. All kinds of things that you'd associate with chronic stress. Then earlier on, we deal with burnout, the quicker it is to make a change and get you back on track. So in some cases, we can do 3 months of coaching and get someone not just like back from burnout, but in the healthiest, most positive space they've been in, because they really understand how to manage their work and life, maybe their personal responsibilities, to consciously create healthy habits and routines, starting their day right, switching off in the evening, like I say, taking care of their health. So we can do a lot in a short space of time, the earlier we start, basically. When people have got to a stage of kind of severe burnout, it takes a little longer. It might be about 6 months, because we may need to, we do need to really help them take care of their health, deal with things like brain fog and anxiety and and say insomnia takes a bit longer, whilst now trying to rebuild healthy habits and things that enable them to create more balance. You know, we see companies who've got in-house coaching, which is available, which is great. And I encourage you to, you know, make the most of that and take advantage of it. So much can be achieved just from having a space to talk out with someone that's objective and impartial. But also increasingly, organizations are giving funding to individuals to go and find a coach or find some other form of self-care that can be powerful for them. And of course, that's a great thing. The autonomy of being able to go off, go out, do your own research and find a coach that you want to have in your corner to work with you, and then to have some funding from your organization to sponsor that is really, really impactful. So yeah, I am seeing more of that. It's a great thing.
Great. Thank you very much. I think that's are we cuddling up a bit?
Yeah.
There we go. Charlie, do you need that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I think it's kind of interesting actually to see the amount of people and the amount of interest that we've had around this topic, and particularly, you know, we've talked a lot about CAN actually over the last couple of days, and we always think that CAN is a bit of a safe space for people to talk about things, and there are things that are on the edge of practice that these are really important we don't talk enough about. And I'm going to kind of break one of my own personal rules, is ask something of the audience at the start of things, because you never know kind of what's going to come back. But I'm kind of interested a little bit before we get stuck in, and before I ask Mim, Bryn and Charlie, who've been, you know, wonderful by volunteering to be up here on this very difficult topic. But can we have a quick show of hands in the room? Anyone, you know, is everyone, you know, either witnessed or experienced? So if it's in your immediate team and you've seen people burn out or seen this happen, or undue stress within this, or if you have a personal experience in this, could you raise your hand? Let's see how many people do we think that's pretty much everyone. There's one or two exceptions within it, but it is extraordinarily common, and yet for something that is happening so often and to so many people, we spend so little time talking about it. And so, thank you for that immediately. It's because it's sometimes a difficult thing. That's why I asked if it was someone immediate. It's a difficult thing to talk about if it's been yourself. And I'm, you know, to fess up immediately and to share, you know, I think I've probably been through this about 3 times in my, over the length of my career. And often denial has been my biggest enemy around this. But so I'm going to open up the first question through to the panel, and I'll start with you, Mim, down the far end. and so, you know, and I'm going to ask you each, can you each tell us a little bit about your experiences that has brought you to, you know, talk about this today?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Me again. So I personally experienced burnout a few years ago when I was in a different role. Just reached the point where I could be at work, but I was not well at work. But work was the only thing I could do to try and not think about the fact that I was burning out. So trapped in that cycle of I'm not well, and I'm still not going to be well at the end of the day, but I'm going to do that and repeat for a few weeks until finally I took some time off and went to Mexico and had a really great week there. But jokes aside, at that time I was not necessarily having a bad time with work and what I was delivering. I actually had probably some of the best campaigns I was working on back then, going out and just doing what they were supposed to do and even more. But I was thrown into a role where I had to deal with line management and someone in the team that I had to look after who himself was burning out. And he was not able to put words to it. I was not able to put words to that either. Very little support to actually try and deal with that situation. And we ended up with that situation where the two of us were really in a bad place, basically. So that was my first experience. I would be quite confident in saying that a couple of years back it happened again, probably not as extensively as it did the first time. And that's something that I'm trying to prevent happening again, even though I think I'm edging closer and closer this year at this time of the year. So that's why I wanted to contribute to this panel and started chatting with you all. I think talking about it and talking about how we feel is super important. I know that for a lot of us, we want to keep that professional face. We want to hide how we may not feel so well sometimes. We don't want to say that we may want a hug. We may need a little bit of support. We may need a 15 minutes break in the middle of the day. And that's not right. That's not fair. And I've always believed that showing your emotions is never a bad thing. And if it makes people uncomfortable, then so be it. But just being open about it, I think, is important, because as we've seen with the show of hands, every one of us is affected by this kind of thing. So let's talk about it to support one another better.
Bryn.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me on. So my name is Bryn. I work for Sainsbury's. I'm a senior accessibility specialist there. And I have been for the last 5 years. And I'd experienced burnout through a partner of mine many years ago who worked in social services. And it was shortly after I joined Sainsbury's. We had the pandemic, and I don't know how. I think my general insight into this is that I feel a lot of who pushes me closest enough to the edge is me. I'm the one. I go out and I end up pushing myself close to the edge, and I took it upon myself to solve how we would validate people with disabilities so they would qualify for deliveries, because there was a shortage of deliveries. Which was a completely really naive thing to try and put myself to do. And it was just all panic, and it was really intense. It was really exciting. And then it was really completely unmanageable. And that's, So I'm not totally sure if I would use the language burnout. I don't know. I feel like a little bit of I'm not sure how qualified I am to talk about that, but I can talk about feeling completely overwhelmed and completely stressed to the point where I can't, go to sleep.
It's definition of burnout.
Yeah. But maybe we'll get onto it. Otherwise, I'll stop talking now. I'll carry on talking.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because I think that where, and I kind of relate to that, because it's first admitting to yourself that you're pushing yourself through this, whereas the pressure that's coming from is a really interesting point around this, how much of it is us. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Here's a room full of people who want to fix things for other people. That is why we're all here, is because we care enough about other people that we feel are being left out and not being regarded and not being, that we drive ourselves. And, and taking on that project is that whole thing of there's opportunity. There's a chance to do something, no matter how impossible the task. And so that's something I think we're going to pick up a little bit. Charlie.
Yeah. Do you know, it was weird, because when we first started talking about doing the burnout session for Can, and I know I was on that panel, but I kind of was like, I felt like a bit of a frog. So I thought, have I had that big experience? But I think my burnout just looked different than other people, so I didn't necessarily recognize it. It was intermittent moments of just feeling like this is really too much and I've taken on too much. I think from an ADHD point of view, I want to do all of the things all of the time at the same time. And that's where I get a lot of enjoyment from. But I only started spotting that I had burnout when I didn't like what I was doing and I wasn't enjoying it anymore. And I love accessibility. I love what I do. I love it so much that I spend all of my waking hours doing something about it, whether that is making sure that the group on LinkedIn on Can is working and people are connecting and answering people's questions, and then doing the work, and then anything else that we do, even on the side around accessibility. But that burnout is a horrible feeling, because the thing that I enjoy the most, I just didn't really want to get up and do. And I think having spotted that, one of the key things that I found was really helpful is speaking to people about it. But I do have quite a close-knit circle. Like I'd speak to you, or I'd speak to Heather or Romana, and there's people that I feel like I can go to and have the experience. But it wasn't until I started speaking to you and being frantic of not being able to do anything is realizing that burnout was happening, but mainly because you told me it was happening. So I was like, that's what it is. Right? I was like, I'm just not.
By the way, if anyone didn't know, Charlie and I used to work together at BBC, and I was Charlie's manager.
Yeah.
Discuss.
Yeah, exactly. 3 hour conversations where you can't get off the phone from Gareth, which is basically my entire job. But and it was great. But I think one of the big parts about it, and maybe other people have felt the same, was during the pandemic. Like I'm an incredibly social person, and all of a sudden I was living on my own and with no interactions with people, and you push yourself into accessibility because your job's everything that you have, and then realizing that that's all you do and you don't actually have any breaks for yourself. And I think, we were in an incredible team, but the pandemic also provided opportunities for people to remote work who may never have done that before. So as a team of people that generally only work remotely now had these wider opportunities. Losing a group of people that you rely on every day to really enjoy your job was really difficult. So to go from being in a team of like 7 to maybe just a couple of you, you lose your community. I think that probably triggered the burnout right at the very beginning.
And we had a very neurodivergent team. Yeah. And,
Fabulous.
I mean, we were, like the top trumps of neurodivergence, I think, within across our team. We would have won every
one of
game.
Everything, yeah.
We had the lot, yeah. But as a manager, then that becomes interesting because, then stress and anxiety, etc., manifest in different ways. We've both got ADHD. Yeah. Which someone described to me recently as not being able to process lots of things, but not being able to process the future. So everything you're processing is what's hitting you in the face at this very moment. And so you're constantly dealing with the now, which is an incredibly stressful way of doing it. And I think this is where we spot, even though, I was the manager. We didn't treat it in a hierarchical way, simply because one of the things we wanted to make sure is that we all looked out for each other as best we possibly could, which is a really difficult thing to do, which kind of brings me on to the next question. And I'm going to go to Bryn actually first around this, because one of the things is, not only, and I think there was that recognition that you had of seeing something in yourself that it's not right, and that's a lot to admit to start off with. It's a lot to deal with. And Mim, you touched on this. It's that whole thing of dealing with this, but it's spotting the things in ourselves. How do we go about spotting the things in ourselves? How do we go about spotting the things in those around us as well? And then, how do you approach that?
Yeah. The signs are, they're quite blatant, to be honest, like not being able to stop or saying I'll stop in a second or whatever, and just not being able to do it. And I wonder if there's a fine line between like flow and, and sort of being on the edge of burnout, because I'm like, I'm really on a roll and it's 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's like, I'm losing time. That is definitely a sign, and obsessing is definitely a sign. But if I'm honest, at my time at Sainsbury's, my line manager has been really valuable in going like, what's going on? What are you up to? And I don't recognise it. It's really important to have that. And I find the whole process is just like one long sort of isolation attempt. I'm just sort of isolating more and more in my head. Not talking to this stuff. I'm like, that delivering that Phoenix project that never sees the light of day. Yeah, that's the signs for me. Yeah.
Mim, do you sort of relate to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what we've seen in the clip before, I was going through my head like insomnia, tick, tummy aches, tick. Yeah. So that some things are so common, and I think it's. If you pay attention enough to your own self and listening to your body and listening to what your mind is saying, you start noticing that. I know that for me, one of the very clear factors is I will avoid social interactions, communicating with my family, communicating with friends. If I get a message, I give the most simple answer. I don't dive into anything. And first time it happened for me, I was still living in London at the time. And I just I think in hindsight, I probably spent 2 months without socializing with any of my colleagues, friends, all of that. It was just like going to work, coming back home. That's it. But one thing that I also noticed, which for me is very hard to notice because I'm very cynical and sarcastic, but when you start getting even more cynical about things, about your job, about the way you do things, about your relationships with your stakeholders and all of that, that's also a sign that something is brewing probably. So thinking about those things that are not exactly you may feel like there's just okay, you're just tired. No, it's probably a little bit more than that. Yeah. So thinking about those signs and adding things up, basically. Because you could say, oh, I've had a bad sandwich for lunch. But actually, why are you up all night? Why can't you switch off in the evening?
Yeah.
Adding those things together and connecting those dots is what will make you realize really that, okay, burnout time.
Yeah, well, the emotional response to a sandwich is probably a sign.
Exactly.
It's just a sandwich. Okay.
I was going to say, following on from Mim, I think you really right, that pattern recognition. Yeah. And I think it's two things. Like, one, if you don't know your team and the people that you're working alongside, then you're not going to spot burnout in others because you're not going to notice any character changes, anything that they're doing that seems a little bit off. So I think having that time, that social time with the team is really important because then you're getting to know the people. We're not asking everybody to be best friends and hang out all the time, but I think just knowing that if there is a change, you can recognize it and then reach out and then to create a comfortable and safe enough space for that person to feel okay about sharing that thing with you. You know, you don't have to share everything, but just being able to say, actually, I do need a little bit of help with this. I do need a little bit of support. And I think for me, especially as an ADHD person, the perfectionist half the time, and that kind of feeling of failure, I think is really overwhelming. Yeah. And one of the things that I noticed was my coping mechanisms didn't work as well as they used to. So, you know, trying to body double or trying to do all these other different things that help with the ADHD just didn't really help anymore. And so that was the only way I noticed that I didn't really have anything that was working. And so that's when you almost needed to talk about it and say, is there another way of doing this? Is there something that I'm not seeing? Can you take something off me? Even though I'm holding on to it exceptionally tight, and learning to let go because you cannot do all of the things. Accessibility is never done. You're never finished. And so of course you're going to feel burnout because it's really difficult to have that sense of completion. But definitely trying to, enjoy the wins and accepting the wins and understanding that the losses aren't all about, not always losses. It's sometimes just an opportunity to learn.
Yeah. There's that whole problem that we don't like letting people down, and that's a sense in accessibility if you don't deliver. Am I letting someone down? There's an enormous amount of self-pressure in that. And should we become, as professionals, instead of burning ourselves, should we become more comfortable with letting things burn?
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. And like you're touching on something really kind of close to my heart, and there's a real sort of conflict of interest in, like, there is also this element of ego, you know, like big egos of battle, you know, it's a real thing, you know, and it wants me to get out there and achieve, do you know what I mean? And that needs, I think it's really important to acknowledge that. But more to your point, you know, like, it's completely unmanageable to deliver across the spectrum of humanity, you know. Like,
even though we try.
It's not a thing. And the only reason that people think it's a thing is because they don't understand what is involved. So I think it's important to reconcile that. And I've lost I can't remember what the question was.
It's the thing about... And I suppose, I can't remember who first said this to me, and it's kind of stuck with me, and I wish I could remember who said it, is that accessibility isn't a job, it's a life choice. Yeah. And and which then becomes a problem, that it becomes part of everything. We think about it all the time. And that, this is one of those pressures. And my question, I think, was around, is it sometimes, because everything is on fire from what a perspective, and nothing is ever fully accessible. Everything is broken some way for someone. Should we be more comfortable with either saying no to doing stuff or just letting things basically sometimes burn? because we can't deal with it. Is that, is that something, is that a reckoning for us?
Like, you can't, I mean, have you ever, I mean, maybe we don't even feel comfortable enough to say it. I mean, it's hard enough answering the question of which one of these issues should I prioritise.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But maybe I'm not saying, I agree, I think we should be able to let things burn, but like I feel like also needs to be a bit of a consensus that that's an option.
Yeah.
I think we talked about managing expectations just before. You just mentioned that, Charlie. I think a lot of it is down to that. I think generally speaking, we care so much about what we do. Yeah. We fall into those professions or those topics we touch on in our day jobs, and we love it. We understand the value of it. We understand the impact it can have on people, on society, and so on. And therefore, we have those big expectations. We want to fix everything. We want to look at everything. We want to bring people with us on that journey and so on. But there's only so much we can do, especially when we are like the one person in a large organization looking at it, or we are the one providing training to X number of people across an organization, or trying to convince customers that it's the right thing to do and so on. So I think there's a lot around how do we best set the bar for ourselves as individual contributors, as leaders in our organizations, whichever role we have. And I know, and I've spoken about that before when we had the Cannes meetup, like I know that personally, I have really high expectations. Not that I expect to do everything and be great at everything, but I really want to achieve a lot in the sense of this has an impact. And what I'm spending my time and energy doing every day is useful. And when you get into that, sometimes you want to put so many things on that list. But at the same time, is my employer expecting me to achieve this much? Because if you were here this morning, we started from zero in my business. So every step forward is actually a really big step forward. So am I right and fair to myself when I say I want to achieve that, when maybe the business want me to be halfway through that by X number of months or whatever? So I think looking back on our expectations and being quite, not necessarily just realistic, but being kind to ourselves and what we want to do and can do and will deliver will also help us not doing too much and being able to say no with confidence, because it's also fine to say no sometimes.
Yeah. Is it true then, Charlie, taking from what Mim's just said, is, to better help other people, we need to help ourselves first.
Yeah, 100%.
And look after ourselves first.
Yeah, I almost did it in you're measuring it. So if I'm extremely productive for that period of time and then I experience burnout and it's going to take me a bit of time to get back to where I am, then it's almost like the productivity doesn't really matter as much anymore. Whereas if I pace myself and understand that I need the break and I need to look after myself so much more, then I'm going to be more effective in the long run anyway. And so it's checking on yourself and thinking about like it in that way. I try not to do everything all the time, even with Cannes stuff. It's a lot of work. It's really valuable to a lot of people, and I'm really glad that we did it. But it is in my own time. And that time is limited anyway, because I'm trying to do lots of stuff in the daytime and I don't know when to switch off. So I've already stole some of the time I would normally do for Cannes. And luckily there's three of us, so it is really helpful. But it is tiring, and sometimes I have to put it down and say, okay, I can't do that today. Like, people will just have to wait, or nothing's actually on fire. Nothing bad's going to happen if I don't look at LinkedIn this week. Even though I feel like it's a social pressure. Yeah. But and then also doing stuff like taking notifications off your phone. I've always had my work emails on my phone. LinkedIn's always there. Me and you always have a new idea, and we're thinking of something else, and we're on the phone for however long, thinking of what we want to build, what we can make better for somebody. But realistically, that is not sustainable. And so you have to almost be honest with yourself of, this is what I can do, these are my parameters, try and stick to them at least a little bit.
It's a massive buzz though, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I love it.
One of the things is accessibility. I mean, I've kind of asked myself this before, and I'm wondering whether I'm an accessibility addict. And but it is. There is a really good feeling from it when it's going well. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. But at the same time, with other things that can be along those lines, when it's not going well, it can be quite destructive, can't it?
Yeah,
can't it?
Definitely. I think the highs and lows are. it's impossible. I have a vision impairment, and it's impossible to keep that separate from my work. And that really, like the highs are really high, and you feel, and the lows are really low. It's sort of like I'm in a sort of existential way. Every success is like, okay, I'm a valid, I'm here, on merit, and people like me have a right to equal access to things. And on a bad day, it's like I'm failing, myself and people like me. So it's like, that's madness. But I'm sure, I don't think you don't have to look far to see synergy in other areas as well, So it's definitely not unique to this, but there is something about the breadth of accessibility that complicates it.
Mim, what do you?
I don't think I have anything to add to that. That's just like
just nodding.
It is extraordinary, and I think there's one last little bit I think we can talk about, and it's kind of worried me always a little bit, because a lot of professions, a lot of people experience burnout in lots of different professions, but it seems to be extremely common in accessibility. There is a big problem that we have to deal with. It's an elephant in the room. Why do you think it's so common?
I think there's a ton of reasons. I think it's an emotional job. We genuinely care about what it is that we're doing, and the more you know, the kind of, and I feel like the more cynical you are about the rest of the world, because you're just thinking, why isn't everyone doing this? This is ridiculous. And the more you're aware of the barriers that people are experiencing on a day-to-day basis, so it's like with more knowledge, almost comes more power, but also it's depressing sometimes when you see certain stuff, and you can't switch it off. You might be watching TV and thinking, oh, that's so terrible, or there's no audio description here, and it's all the time, and you are frustrated with the world, because you know more. Even I've had champions that the more they're learning, they're almost like, it's too much. Like now I know just how bad this product is, and it's uncomfortable, and I also think we are not necessarily viewed in the wider world as having a profession that people deem valuable half the time. You might be in an environment where there's no accessibility team in the entire, it's really frustrating to have to justify your place in an organisation all of the time. You never get funding, you never get anything, you have to beg, borrow and steal constantly. And it's great because we've got a community where we can share, and that's lovely. But, it's difficult even to get money to pay speakers and things like that. It's frustrating. And so I think because we care so much, it does affect you when things go wrong, and you take it personally.
And I think to your point, it's exactly that, the element of frustration building up and feeling like, obviously, that continuous progress, never really completing the accessibility picture and all of that. But again, a lot of us are just one in your organization. You don't have a peer you can turn to during the coffee break and be like, oh, this happened, how would you approach it, blah, blah, blah. This kind of stuff cannot happen really for a lot of people in those jobs. So having a peer you can talk to and share those challenges with, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why the CAN group is so thriving, is because people find those similar issues, share those feelings and frustrations, and I think that element of building up those frustrations and wanting to achieve something that is so much greater than what we have today is a huge factor in why accessibility professionals are burning out so much. But I was chatting with a couple of people during the lunch break, and at the same time, we should not forget all the progress we've made, especially personally, I've been in that field for like a couple of years, 2-3 years now, and even I can see how much progress has happened in just a short amount of time. And everyone driving in that direction and trying to achieve better. Obviously, we are always going to have that bias of saying, well, this is okay, but that is not. And always deflecting onto the negative stuff. But at the same time, keeping an eye on those wins, whether they are small or big, is so important.
Yeah, it's just reminded me of a little anecdote that was told me by a boss at the BBC, wonderful chap called Ralph Rivera. He was talking about the relationship between BBC and the licence fee payer, and I'm now realising this is about burnout as well, where he was brought up by his grandmother, and his grandmother was really, really pushed him. He grew up in the Bronx, and best way out of the Bronx is through a good education. He said to me, and he said he'd get 98% in a maths test at school. He'd come home and his grandmother would say, what happened to the other 2%? and that's kind of our relationship with ourselves in what you were just saying, is we don't look at the 98%, we look at the 2.
Yeah.
And
I think because you know what the 2 affects, you know, you're looking at the people that you might not have designed for, the people that have been excluded, because our entire job is to look at who has been excluded. And so that is what you're focusing on. But you make a really good point, and I think the little wins, you might not necessarily always see those wins in your own organisation, in your own team, but you can celebrate other people's wins. You know, the amount of times I've had corridor conversations like here, and even today someone came up to me and was just like, oh yeah, this time last year, you know, I just started my programme and now I'm working with Heather and now I'm doing this, and you're just thinking, oh, that's so cool. Like that's, in a year you've made so much progress, and I celebrated that. I felt good about that. And so, you know, try and even linking up with other teams. Anyway, I speak to accessibility professionals like every week, you know, from other organisations for whatever reason, for ideas shares or to exchange, doing speaking sessions, things like that, ideas for champions. I want champions from other organisations to get together and maybe share about what they're doing. Because I think that you can celebrate other people's wins. You can talk about resources, and those communities and that community element of it, I think, is so important. But I agree. I think that win is something that we probably need to focus on a little bit more. And even if they're small, it's still incredibly relevant.
It is. We don't spend enough time to just stop and think about what we've done and how good it is and how cool it is in some ways, and just sit there and be a bit smug.
Yeah.
And just go, yeah, it's all right. Okay, we've got places to go, but look where we were. And by the way, this is ADHD brain. I've got to get this out of the way, and I'm just about to embarrass a guy who's just down the front here called Al Duggan. And you can put your hand up, Al, because I've just realised, you know, you were the first ever accessibility champion, because you were the first person in the Accessibility Champions Network. You approached us and went, I want to know everything, to Henny. I remember the conversation at the beginning of the work on the Olympics, and that's when we decided to set up the Accessibility Champions Network, and we had a network of 1. And it was you. So you are the original. You are the blueprint for all that we're doing in Cannes across there. Thank you very much. Al, sorry. Now I'm ever in your debt. But it's there's so much to take away from what you 3 have said. It's an extraordinary thing. It's an extraordinary thing that we do. And it's an extraordinary thing that also we need to think about the way that we manage and the way that we care for ourselves.
Yeah. And I also think it's checking in on your team, you know, checking in on other people. It's really important, because it'll come around and someone will check in on you, and you might be thinking, I didn't even realise I was burnt out, but actually, yeah, you're dead right. Like, I've not been enjoying something, or I've run out of ideas, or anything else like that. And I think so if we all almost put that into practice as something that we try and do regularly, then I think everyone will feel a little bit more supported.
Yeah, absolutely. Have we got any questions? Do you think we're going to need any time to take any questions? I'm going to be complete ADHD about this. I've got absolutely no idea how much time we've got left, whether we've overrun, underrun.
I've gone rogue.
Or even where we are.
Seconds.
30 seconds.
8 minutes and 30 seconds.
8
minutes.
minutes.
8 minutes and 30 seconds. Wonderful.
Thank you. I found that really useful. I think my question is, so if you do notice that you think someone's burning out, how would you go about having that open discussion? And what if even after you bring it up, they're like, no, I'm fine.
Is this person a peer, or is it someone you manage, or is it your manager?
So I work in a team with high neurodiversity, and I'm thinking at the minute of someone in my team. And then obviously, just how you can go about I don't think they recognise in themselves when they're burning out, even if I see it. So it's how do you go around that situation?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think sometimes this is how I would approach it. I'd share my own experience. I wouldn't necessarily be like, hey, I think you're burnt out. Because I think, you can get defensive. I'm like, no, I'm perfectly fine. But like, so I might describe it, a couple of years ago, I felt like this, or have you ever experienced that? I think leveling the playing field feels like a safe space, because then we're all sharing. It feels less like an interrogation and more like, hey, have you noticed this in yourself? Because I've noticed this for me. And I think also it makes the other person feel valuable, because they are, even if everybody's experienced some kind of burnout or stress or whatever it is. I'm not saying make up a scenario, but it's just having that conversation with them and approaching it in that way just makes it feel a little bit more like we're just having a chat rather than anything else.
Yeah.
I completely double down on that. Recently I spoke with colleagues who've gone through burnout themselves or have noticed their teams not behaving the same way as they usually do. And what came out of those conversations a lot of time is, maybe I'm going to offend a couple of people, don't be too British about it. Mm-hmm. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't go straight, are you burning out? Obviously not. But don't hide it behind something else. Say exactly what you notice that is different from what you see usually.
Yeah.
Be specific about what you feel is not the usual way of working with that person or having that person around, and don't necessarily always or straight away offer solutions, but ask if there's anything that you can do to help. Find those mechanisms where something can happen. One thing that I would say that from my personal experience, being told, do you want to take time off, doesn't help me. No. And that's something that we hear a lot. Like, oh yeah, someone's burning, well, they just need to go on a few days off. It doesn't resolve anything.
Because you still can't switch off even if you've taken time off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So consider what in the conversation can make it constructive and productive for that person. To really get to a point where they feel more comfortable and start opening up, because they may not have noticed at all that something has changed in their behavior, because as we've mentioned, we don't necessarily clock it in straight away. We don't join the dots. And having that external eye on us and someone who I would expect we think cares about us and our contribution and our being in the organization, obviously that adds a lot of value, I would say.
I really resonate that. I think destigmatizing it is massive. I think, because it's uncomfortable. Even sat on the stage talking about burnout, you feel really exposed. Like everyone knows I've been stressed. But actually, like, that's okay. Like it happens. It happens to everybody in any industry. There's burnout for the fact that it's a lot of high pressure places. So I think that the destigmatization of it is a great approach.
Yeah, it's not failure. If anything,
No.
it's from what you've all talked about, it seems to be a symptom of trying to succeed beyond, what is in your gift to do. Yeah. When you're trying to go past, what you've been asked to do and to what is needed.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really a sort of outcry for sort of perspective and resetting in a way, and hopefully there's an opportunity to do that before you get to that stage, as a preventative measure. I think it should be part of performance conversations and all of that stuff. Not necessarily, I'm going to be British about it, not necessarily in the guise of burnout, but maybe it could be. I don't think that's off the cards, is it? But it's perspective, like the perspective, like I was talking about earlier. It's really wild, thinking that you're thinking the world's going to carry on turning. You know what I mean? It doesn't need me to turn. Just calm down.
Calm down. Take a breath.
Yeah, take a breath.
Have a chat.
Yeah.
I think we've all been through. I mean, I've had to, as a manager, and seeing it happen as someone within a peer management group and seeing it happen to someone within that group, and quite obvious, and being managed. And, and I've had 3 instances where I think the word intervention might be a bit strong, but it certainly felt that way, of having a manager basically frog march me into a room and saying, stop, we're worried about you, and because you don't seem to stop, and are you okay? And just hearing that kind of shocked me into thinking that what is going on a little bit, because I trusted them. They were my line manager, but we were good friends as well. And I think sometimes, it wasn't like they made me a cake with, you are burning out. It's a nice way of delivering it. But, there are ways that you can engage with it. It's actually cake is...
Burnout.
Yeah, I was going to say, you would have enjoyed it.
It's a lot of candles. A hell of a lot of candles. But it is a tricky one to do. But if you know that person well enough, it's being intelligent, use your friendship, use the trust that you have, and sit down and sometimes, a little bit of honesty and a little bit of care. We don't all have to be a functional family in there. We can be a little bit dysfunctional about this. And I think, even within our team, we had it, there was plenty of dysfunctional, but we were close. At the same time, we trusted each other to save the awkward things.
And you know what? It might not always go the way you think. It might not go down well. And it doesn't mean that you've failed at having that conversation. We're burnt out because we've got a fear of failure and not doing it right. And then someone turns around and goes, oh, you're acting a little bit different, or you're not performing in the same kind of way that you usually does. I would take that as, what do you mean I'm not doing a good job? I'm not going to take that well. Yeah. But it's still, having the conversation is better than not having the conversation. Even if it just means that person didn't particularly like it, but is aware now that maybe they can have a little assessment of themselves. It might even be that weeks later someone comes back to you and goes, yeah, you were probably right about that. Yeah. And so even though the conversation might be uncomfortable, it's always worth having.
Yeah. I had one where it was stop sending emails at 1:30 in the morning.
Which you scheduled them instead.
And I responded back to my line manager. I said, well, stop responding to them at 1:35 in the morning. And then we had a bit of a chat and we realised both of us were not in a good place. And, and we helped each other out, and it was like, you start policing each other. So this is it. It's like Can, but within your space is show a little bit of care, spend a little bit of time, and be a little bit honest.
And I think, thank you. And something you said then I just picked up on as well, where it's sort of having that conversation, and helping that person realise themselves, where I think sometimes we just want to fix people because we care about them, but maybe trying to get them to see and, put in things themselves with that support as well. So, thank you.
Are we at time?
Am I allowed to say you need to know when to stop? 14:45. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you, all of you, for that. It was fantastic.